sword drawn, rain-soaked coat open at the collar. He stepped through the darkness and found her 3 steps from the window, a stolen file pressed against her hip. No guards. No witnesses. Just the 2 of them, a guttering candle, and the name she gave him that changed everything. He could have killed her. He could have thrown her in a cell and called it justice. Instead, by morning she had signed her name to a marriage contract, and he had watched her hands while she did it. Not the document. Her hands. What did he see in that moment that made a king choose a thief for a bride, and what was she really after when she broke into his archive that night? Watch till the end. The truth is darker and sweeter than you think. Rain had been falling since dusk. Not the forgiving kind, the kind that seeps through wool and settles into bone. Seraphine Valdecourt pressed her back against the archive wall and counted the heartbeats between lightning strikes. 3, 1, 2, 1. Darkness returned. She moved. The window latch gave on the second try. She had studied the mechanism for a week from a sketch borrowed from a cartographer who owed her a favor. Favors are the only currency that keeps its value, her father had always said. She thought of him now, briefly, the way she always did when she was about to do something irreversible. His face. The way his hands had shaken when Crow's men pressed the quill into his palm and told him to sign. She did not let herself feel it. There was no room for it in a window frame. The archive smelled of beeswax and old vellum. She moved along the shelves with her candle, shuddered to a thread of light, fingers reading the spines by touch. House records. Border treaties. Correspondence. Eastern. There. Vault Court. The name sat between 2 thicker files, like something someone had meant to hide, but hadn't quite managed. She pulled it free and tucked it into the satchel at her hip without opening it. She just needed it out. Without it, whatever Crow held over her family name would hold forever. She was 3 steps from the window when the door opened. No torch. No warning. Just a figure stepping through the frame, and then the soft drag of a sword leaving its scabbard. The candle went out. She froze. The darkness between them held for 2 full seconds, long enough for her pulse to find itself behind her ears, in her throat, at the tip of every finger gripping the windowsill. Then lightning split the sky, and in that half-breath of silver light she saw him. Tall. Wan. Dark-haired, still damp from the rain, coat open at the collar, like a man who had come out, not to be seen but to think. The sword angled toward the floor rather than her throat, but only just. His eyes, in that sliver of storm light, were the gray of iron left in the rain. Not warm. Not cold exactly. Just watching. And then something else. The pupils, for a fraction of a second, caught the lightning and held a flash of amber, there and gone, like a coal glimpsed through ash. She catalogued it without understanding it. She was not certain she had seen it at all. The blade came up. She did not step back. Don't flinch, she told herself, though her body wanted to. A flinch is an invitation. She had learned that early. Before the debt collectors. Before the creditors who smiled while they stripped the paintings from the walls. You are standing in the Royal Archive, the man said. His voice was low, unhurried, the way large things moved, with the certainty of their own weight. In the middle of the night, with a satchel. I noticed, she said. Put the satchel down. She did not put the satchel down. The silence stretched. He had taken a step without seeming to move. 5 feet now, not 6. She became aware of the distance between them, the way you become aware of a fire when you stand too close, not by looking at it, but by the warmth reaching places you hadn't noticed were cold. Who are you? He said. Don't give him the name for free. Someone who knows what's in that file. That landed differently than she intended. His jaw tightened briefly. She filed it. He already knew what was in the file, and whatever it contained, it cost him something to hear that she did too. The name. Now. She exhaled through her nose. Seraphine Valdecourt. A pause. I suspect you recognize it. The name did something to the room. The slight adjustment in his posture, not a recoil but a recalibration. He knew the family. Everyone in the kingdom did. 3 Eastern territories, a trade network, a name that had opened doors. Then her father had signed something he never should have signed, and the doors had closed one by one, until there were none left. Valdecourt, he said. That. Testing. The last one, she said, because she had learned that names were a kind of armor, when said without apology. He held her gaze a moment that felt longer than it was. Then, slowly, he lowered the sword. Come with me, he said. She came. They brought her to a room that was neither dungeon nor receiving hall, a mid-ranking chamber firelight, 2 chairs, a table with a candle already lit. Gregor, an old soldier whose grey beard did not make him look gentle, stood at the wall with his arms folded. The man who had found her in the archive stood behind the table without sitting. She sat. They had not offered it. She did it anyway. Gregor laid it out simply, without ornamentation. The Valdecourt name still held weight in the Eastern territories, frayed as it was. A marriage alliance would bind what remained of the family to the crown. The threat would become an asset. The problem would become a resource. She looked at the man behind the table. He was not looking at Gregor. He was looking at her, with the same measuring stillness he had held in the archive, as though trying to determine something she had not agreed to reveal. She held his gaze. She had learned to do that too. And if I refuse, she said. You're not being given the option to refuse, Gregor said. Everyone is given the option to refuse. The consequences simply vary. The man behind the table made a sound that might have been a laugh. He reached forward and slid a document toward her. She looked at it. Then she looked at him. Your title will be Luna Nordenmarch, he said, his voice carrying the precision of someone reporting a decision already made. Your standing within the court will be commensurate with that title. I require nothing more from you than the use of your family name. And the file? A pause. Remains in the archive. She had expected that. The file alone was not enough. She had understood that even as she took it, one document without the broader pattern of Crow's transactions was evidence a court could contest for years. She had needed to see it. She had not expected to keep it. Not yet. She picked up the quill. She signed with steady strokes, the letters clear and unhurried, because she had decided that if she was going to do this, she was going to do it as herself. Not as a prisoner. Not as a girl who had been caught. When she looked up, he was watching her hands. Not the document. Her hands. She set the quill down. He looked away first. The room smelled of candle wax and cedar, and something she could not name. A faint mineral quality, like stone after rain. The fire had been laid. The bed made with precision. The whole space arranged as if for an occasion, which of course it was. Seraphine stood near the window and looked at the courtyard below, where the last torches were being extinguished. She heard the door open behind her. She did not turn. I won't force anything. His voice, from the doorway. Clean, without ceremony. This is a political arrangement. I want that to be clear. She turned. He stood just inside the frame, fully dressed, coat still buttoned despite the room's warmth. The only thing I ask, she said, is that you don't pretend it's something else. He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once. He took the chair beside the hearth. She took the bed. The fire burned down between them, slow and unhurried, and neither spoke again. She lay on her back and looked at the carved ceiling, and listened to the rain, which had been falling all night, and showed no intention of stopping. There is no middle season here, she thought, and was not entirely sure she meant the rain. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, his breathing shifted. She turned her head. In the dying firelight, his face was different. The lines of it were the same, the jaw and brow unchanged. But the tension that lived around his mouth when he was awake had released entirely. And without it, he looked not young, precisely, but unguarded. A wall with the garrison asleep. She could see the effort in him even in sleep. The set of his shoulders, the way his hands rested on the armrests, with a carefulness that spoke of a man who had spent years being careful. She did not know why that was harder to look at than the sword had been. She crossed the room without sound, and took the folded blanket from the chest at the foot of the bed. She laid it over his shoulders, one corner, then the other. Her hands stilled. "What are you doing?" she thought with great clarity. She pulled her hands back, stood, returned to the bed. She lay awake for another hour, and she did not think about the look on his face while he slept. She simply did not think about it, and that required considerable effort, which she did not acknowledge either. 6 months passed, the way the first snow passes gradually, then all at once. She learned the shape of his absence before she learned the shape of his presence. He rose before dawn. He took his meals in the council chamber more often than the dining hall. He had 3 horses he visited in the stables on mornings he did not ride, checking their hooves himself rather than leaving it to the grooms. She discovered this by accident, rounding a corner one morning with correspondence, finding him crouched in the straw with a gelding's rear leg balanced across his knee. He had looked up. She had looked at the horse. They had not spoken. She found her own work. No one assigned it. No one quite knew what to do with a Luna who had arrived under these circumstances, and the result was a collective avoidance she found professionally useful. She was invisible. Invisible things could go where visible things could not. She began reading the trade records. She read them because she had grown up watching her father manage accounts, badly at the end, but once well enough that she had absorbed the logic before it ceased to apply. A tax dispute between 2 eastern villages simmering for 3 years. A shipping route from the southern coast that no one had connected with the new inland road. She wrote small notes in blue ink and filed them in her own records, and told herself she was not yet ready to act. Not yet. She had been saying that for 4 months. She watched Aldrich in the council chamber, from the seat at the far end of the table, where the light was worst and the documents reached her last. He listened more than he spoke. When he spoke, people stopped what they were doing. She had noticed from the first week the way a room adjusted its gravity around him when he entered, unconsciously, the way iron filings adjust to a magnet without knowing why. She told herself it was political observation. He never looked at her end of the table. Or if he did, she missed it. Both things, she thought, were equally likely. The noise from the eastern corridor was what woke her. Boots on stone, moving fast and then stopping. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and opened her door. The hallway was mostly empty, but there, at the junction of the east wing, a figure stood alone against the wall, one arm held close against his body, blood darkening the fabric of his sleeve from elbow to cuff. She knew who it was before she saw his face. He was doing arithmetic, calculating how many steps to the physician's quarters, whether it was worth the walk. The physician was occupied, injuries on the northern patrol, 3 soldiers. She had heard the report that evening. She did not ask whether he wanted her help. She returned a minute later with the small wooden case from the bottom of her traveling chest. Needle and thread, linen strips, a jar of honey and pine resin. She pulled the low bench from against the wall and sat, setting the case on her knee. She did not look up at his face. "The sleeve," she said. A pause. Then he pulled the coat from his left shoulder with his right hand, the motion tight and controlled, the way people moved when managing pain they had decided not to show. She rolled the sleeve back. The cut was long and moderately deep, along the outside of his forearm. A blade cut, not a puncture. "Better, Kitty." She worked carefully, spreading the resin with the flat edge of a bone spatula. Pain had never frightened her. Not since she was 12, and had dressed her father's hand after Crow's men had broken 2 of his fingers, after he had refused, the first time, to sign. She had decided then that fear was a luxury for people who still had options. "You don't have to," Aldrich began. "I know," she said. She took his wrist in both hands to hold it steady while she pressed the linen to the cut. She felt his pulse. It was not slow. She registered this as information, filed it, did not look up. "You're not afraid of blood," he said. It was not quite a question. "No." She smoothed the linen, pressed. He held. "Are you?" "No." A pause. Then, as though the words had arrived without planning, "Are you afraid of anything?" She thought about it honestly. "Becoming invisible," she said, "and not noticing until it's already happened." He was quiet. She began winding the binding strip around his forearm in even loops, 3rd pass now, and she became aware that he was watching her hands with the focused attention of a man who has nowhere else to put his thoughts. She tied off the knot, released his wrist, sat back. "That should hold," she said. She reached for the lid of the case. He said, "Thank you." She stopped. Not because the words were unusual. Because of the register in which he said them. Not the rote courtesy of a man remembering his manners. Something quieter. Something that sounded like it cost him something. "Sleep," she said. "The swelling will be worse tomorrow if you don't." She walked back down the corridor without looking at him again. She could feel his gaze at her back by the particular quality of the air behind her. The specific weight of attention withdrawing in stages, rather than all at once. She went to bed and lay very still and refused, with great discipline, to think about his pulse. She failed, somewhat, at the refusing. The report on the Eastern tax dispute was 3 pages, written in the crisp shorthand she had developed working with her father's correspondence. She addressed it to the Council of Nordenmarch and signed it Luna Nordenmarch, because the title was her role, and if she was going to use it, she was going to use it properly. The dispute was resolved in 11 days. She received no acknowledgement. She started the second report. Elspeth, her maid, 19 and constitutionally incapable of pretending she didn't have opinions, watched from the doorway one evening as Seraphine stretched a map across her writing desk and weighted its corners with inkwell. "You know they won't credit you," Elspeth said. "I know. They'll say the council identified the route." "Yes." Seraphine smoothed a crease from the northeast corner. "But the merchants will still be able to use it." Elspeth was quiet a moment. Then, "My lady, are you happy here?" The careful answer rose by reflex. "I am managing well, thank you," and stopped. Elspeth was watching with the particular steadiness of someone who had decided to be witness rather than audience. She was 19 years old and had followed Seraphine from the last remnants of the Waldcourt household, because she had informed Seraphine bluntly on the 3rd day she had nowhere she'd rather go, which was different from nowhere else. Seraphine set the pencil down. "I don't know what I expected," she said, and that was the most honest thing she had said since she arrived. Elspeth reached across the desk and took her hand. She didn't say anything. She just held it, with the straightforward warmth of someone who had nothing to gain from it. Seraphine looked down at their joined hands in the lamplight and felt suddenly the specific heaviness of months in which no one had touched her without wanting something in return. She did not cry. She pressed Elspeth's hand once, let go, picked up the pencil, and went back to the map. The hall was too warm and smelled of candle smoke and roasted boar. Seraphine sat at the table's side and counted the minutes not by the clock, but by the frequency of her own breath, slow and even, showing nothing. Lord Edvard Crowe arrived at her elbow with the ease of a man who had calculated his own welcome in advance. Silver-haired, well-dressed, his eyes the color of polished amber, warm and cold at once, the way fires look from a distance. She knew the face. She had studied it in her father's correspondence, in the documents she had spent 3 years assembling. His family had ruined hers with signed paper and patient malice. She had not expected to find him here, at a diplomatic dinner with a glass of wine and a pleasant smile. "Luna Nord in March," he said. "I've been hoping for an opportunity." She inclined her head. Lord Crowe. He was attentive. He leaned toward her slightly when she spoke, making questions sound like conversation rather than interrogation. She answered him with the precision she used for everything. Enough to be present, not enough to be legible. Across the table, Aldrich was speaking with ambassadors from the southern territories. He had not looked toward her end of the table all evening. He was large in his chair in the way of men not trying to seem large. The breadth of his shoulders catching the candlelight, his hands resting open on the table, his face attentive on the person speaking to him. She watched the slight tightening along his jaw when he disagreed with something and thought, he has a tell. She had catalogued it 6 weeks ago. She had not told anyone. "You seem thoughtful," Crowe said. "I'm listening," she said. She said exactly 4 things for the remainder of the dinner. The man on Crowe's other side said 47. She counted that too. The way she counted things in rooms where counting was the only power available to her. Crowe noticed she had said only 4 things. She saw him notice. He filed it with the efficient precision of a man who made a practice of noticing what others didn't. She was fairly certain Aldrich did not notice. The library at 1 in the morning smelled of old leather and the warm dust of a room that had absorbed decades of winters without complaining. Seraphine sat at the center table with a volume of Nordic trade law and a cup of tea that had gone cold an hour ago, and she had fallen asleep between Chapter 6 and the section on border tariffs, without meaning to. She did not hear him come in. Aldrich stopped at the doorway. He had not expected company. The library was his at this hour, his in the way that things become yours when you use them, when no one else does. He came here on the nights he could not sleep, which had been most nights for the last 4 years. She had not managed to fold herself into a comfortable position, shoulders curled forward, neck tilted at an angle that would hurt in an hour. She looked asleep, like someone who had meant to stay awake and simply run out of the resources required. A single candle burned low at the table's corner. In its orange light, the side of her face was warm. He could go to the map room, the smaller study on the 3rd floor. He stood in the doorway and looked at her instead. Then he crossed the room quietly. He was not quiet by nature, always too aware of the space he occupied. But he had learned through years of nighttime patrols how to move when he needed not to be heard. He took the chair across from her and opened his own work. The candle beside her guttered. He set his papers aside, crossed to the cabinet along the wall, took a new candle, and lit it from the dying flame with cupped hands so the match wouldn't crack in the silence. He slid it into the holder. The light steadied and warmed. He lifted his coat from the back of the chair and laid it over her shoulders. Carefully. She did not stir. He stood there a moment longer than was necessary. Her face without the guard, the controlled quality she carried through every room, that readiness, was younger than he had understood her to be. Records gave you information rather than understanding. Understanding arrived through the moments when a person stopped performing what they were and simply were it, unobserved. You are not, he thought, what I prepared for. He went back to his chair. He read for another hour. When he left, he walked past her one more time on his way to the door. He did not stop. He had already stopped once, and that was enough. He went to bed and slept, for the first time in 11 days, before dawn. You didn't eat again, Elspeth said one evening, taking Seraphine's outer wrap and folding it over her arm. I ate half of it. Seraphine sat at her dressing table and began removing the pins from her hair, one by one, setting them in the small dish. Her reflection looked back at her with the calm expression she had been wearing all evening, which was not the same as her face. Elspeth, she said, do you think a person can simply... She paused, unsure what she was trying to say, which was unusual for her. Practice something until they can no longer feel it? Elspeth set the wrap down and came to stand behind her. In the mirror, her expression was quiet and direct. Happiness, she said. Seraphine said nothing. Or hope, Elspeth said more carefully. The last pin came free. Seraphine looked at herself in the glass. The straight brows, the long throat, the controlled face she had assembled so gradually over so many years that she could no longer remember the version of herself that had come before it. I think, she said, I have forgotten what I expected. The dispute came to a head in early spring. Both village representatives arrived at the council chamber on the same morning with the same intention and no agreement about who had been given the time. The kind of small administrative failure that should not have become a scene, and had managed it anyway. Seraphine watched from her seat as the voices rose. She had the answer, had had it for 40 minutes, since the pattern of the dispute became clear in the first 10, and she waited for the right moment to offer it. She spoke. The room turned toward her briefly, the way a flock of birds turns toward a sound before returning to its business. She watched the 3 nearest council members' eyes slide from her face to Aldrich's face at the head of the table, checking before they decided whether to receive what she had said. She stopped speaking, midway through the second point, simply stopped and waited to see whether anyone noticed. They did not. Lord Crow did. He watched from the middle of the table with the focused interest of someone who has just had a hypothesis confirmed. He leaned forward. I believe Luna Nordenmarch raised a useful point, he said pleasantly, as if completing her thought rather than returning it to the room. Might she continue? Every face turned toward her again. She felt Aldrich's gaze, sudden and direct, arriving like attention pulled from somewhere else. She spoke for 3 minutes, without notes. The solution was correct. By the end of the 3 minutes the council knew it too. Aldrich said, We'll table this for review. He moved to the next item. She looked at the grain of the wood in front of her and thought, he heard the words and not the voice behind them. And then with an exhaustion that sat below her ribs rather than in her throat, I am tired of being the only one who notices the distinction. The kitchen fire was still burning at the 11th hour, only because someone had forgotten to bank it before leaving. Seraphine found it this way, warm, orange, entirely empty of stuff, and ladled herself a bowl from the pot on the low hook. She sat at the long preparation table with her bowl and her book, and ate in the uncomplicated silence of a room that had no expectations of her. The door opened. He stopped briefly in the doorway, taking stock. Then came the rest of the way in with the unhesitating manner of a man who had decided not to make a thing of something. He found a bowl on the shelf, filled it, sat down across the table from her. No ceremony. No introduction. No explanation. She looked at him for a moment, and went back to her book. The fire settled. He ate. She ate. Outside, wind came down from the northern ridge with the particular high-pitched sound that meant another cold week. "What are you reading?" he said. She had not expected conversation. She showed him the spine without lifting her head fully. Historical maps of the Northern March border territories. A sound came from his side of the table. She looked up. He was looking at her with an expression she had catalogued before, the slight tension before he disagreed with something, but lighter, almost amused. "That's what you read at midnight?" he said. "I find it useful to know the terrain." "You've been here a year." "The terrain doesn't stop being the terrain after a year." He was definitely amused now. She did not know what to do with that. She had expected many things from this marriage in the abstract planning she had done before she arrived, and genuine amusement over a bowl of soup at midnight had not been one of them. She felt something adjust inside her chest and looked back at her book before it could settle into anything identifiable. "What weapon do you prefer?" she said. She had not planned the question. He considered. Longbow at distance. Sword in close quarters. Oh. A pause. "Why?" "I was wondering what you were doing in the archive that night." "Patrol. Doubt." "Of the archive?" "Of the castle." He spooned the last of his soup. "I check rooms when I can't sleep. It's a habit." She looked at him across the table. He looked back, and the question hung between them. How often can you not sleep? Unasked on either side. "You should eat more regularly," she said instead. "You missed the first service this morning." He set down his spoon. She felt his gaze with the peripheral certainty of someone who has had cause to become attuned to being watched. "You noticed," he said. "I notice things," she said. "It's a habit." She reached for her book and his elbow moved at the same moment, both leaning forward, and his arm brushed against her shoulder, warm through the linen of her sleeve. Neither of them moved away. One breath. Two. Then the conversation resumed as though the pause had been nothing, because she decided it was nothing, and he appeared to agree. She walked back to her room afterward with the careful footsteps of someone going slowly in a place where she might trip. She sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and thought, "I have been here a year. I do not know that man at all. He does not know me. And tonight we laughed once about a history book. 6 months ago, I would not have believed that was possible." At the diplomatic reception, Crow arrived at her elbow with the deliberate precision of a man executing a planned maneuver. His voice was warm and carrying, the voice of someone trained to fill rooms. He spoke about the Eastern trade route. He spoke about the agricultural reforms. He used her work, her specific, accurate, unreported work, with the fluency of someone who had been watching carefully for longer than she had understood. He had been building this moment for months, she realized. Everything at the dinner table, every attentive question, every catalogued silence, all of it toward this. "Luna Norden March," he said to the circle of ambassadors, "has shown us what is possible when intelligence is properly recognized." The implication was graceful and lethal, and every person in the circle understood it perfectly. She looked at Aldrich. He was 20 feet away and he had gone very still. Not the stillness of anger, not yet, but the stillness of a man who has been handed a mirror he wasn't expecting and is taking the time to understand what he is looking at. His jaw was tight. His eyes, in the candlelight, were darker than their usual gray, or perhaps that was her own temperature, the warmth she had been carefully not acknowledging, finding somewhere to go. She caught, for the space of a breath, the amber beneath the gray, that flash she had first seen in the lightning of the archive, which she had never been able to explain. He had no response ready. because he did not know enough about his wife to defend her or contradict Crow, or say anything at all. The room could see that, and he knew the room could see it. She had thought she would feel satisfied. She did not. She felt only the familiar exhaustion of having been right about something for a very long time. 2 weeks of unchanged silence. She counted them the way she counted everything, not by wanting them to end but by watching each one arrive and pass. She had thought once after the reception that it might be the kind of wake that precedes action. It was not. He was skilled at this, the specific inaction of a man who was not unkind, not hostile, but constituted somehow against the first step. She opened her trunk on the 12th day. She packed methodically 2 evenings, removing only her own things, leaving the rooms exactly as she had found them. Before she closed the trunk, she took the notebook from her writing desk. 3 months of administrative plans for the kingdom, complete in blue ink alloy. She set it on the desk in its place and smoothed the cover. She did not leave it because she forgot it. Dawn came gray and flat, the light the color of cold stone. Seraphine stood at the front gate with Elspeth and 2 small bags, and the steady breathing of someone who has made a decision and is now executing it. She heard no sound from above her. Then she was looking up. He stood in the upper corridor window, only a silhouette against the pale interior light, his shoulders filling the frame in a way that was recognizable even at this distance. Still dressed. He had not slept. She knew this because she could see him, not because she knew him. Or, perhaps, she thought, by now the distinction had blurred. They looked at each other across the height and the courtyard and the cold morning air. She counted 10 seconds. 1 He could come down. She knew the staircase. She had memorized the castle's layout in her first month, because knowing where everything was had always been the first form of safety available to her. 3 flights. 2 doors. The guard at the inner gate would step aside without being asked. He could come down. She saw the shift in his silhouette, his arm lifting slightly. 2 seconds. Then it stilled. Then it fell. She looked at him for one more breath. Then she nodded. Small, the way she would nod to an acquaintance in a corridor, and turned toward the gate and walked through it. The morning closed behind her like water. She did not look back. Not because she couldn't. Because she had learned that looking back was how you became someone who stood in doorways, rather than walking through them. And she had made this decision, and she was going to honor it. She did not cry until they were past the first ridge, and even then only briefly. She would not have called it grief. She would have called it relief, which is what grief turns into when you have been holding it long enough. She wrote the letter to the council from a roadside inn, with Elspeth asleep in the next room, and a candle stub she had bought from the innkeeper for a half-coin. She wrote it in the language of administration, precise, impersonal, complete. She named the 3 active projects and their current state. She included a note at the end. I hope these initiatives will continue to serve the people of the Northern Territories. They were not mine. They belong to the problem. She wrote the second letter in a different hand. Smaller. Without preparing it first. Aldrich. I am not leaving because I hate you. I am leaving because I am not certain you noticed I was there. And I cannot wait any longer to find out whether I am right. I hope you are well. I hope the kingdom is well. S. She sealed them both. She paid the innkeeper to send them in the morning with the courier, because the courier was reliable, and that was a small comfort, to have at least one reliable thing. She blew out the candle, and lay in the dark, and listened to the sound of a roadside inn in spring. She was 30 miles north of Nordenmarch. It was the first night in a year she had not had to perform anything for anyone. She slept. Sire. Gregor waited until the council chamber had emptied before he spoke. He had a talent for this, for allowing rooms to drain until only the people worth speaking to remained. Aldrich stood at the window looking at the practice yard below. "She's been gone 23 days, Gregor said. "I'm aware." "Are you?" It was not a question. Gregor had served 3 generations of this family, and had long since stopped making his observations sound like inquiries. Crow asked after her in this morning's session. He said, publicly, I know. I was there. And you said it was a family matter." "It is." Gregor looked at him. "It is also a political matter, a logistical matter, and a matter of governance. Because she was, without your knowing it, managing 3 of the 4. Tomas arrived with the agricultural report on a Tuesday. He was a careful man, methodical, and the expression on his face was that of someone who had been trying to work out how to explain something for several days. The Northern Grain Project had stalled. The irrigation proposal had no coordinator. The seed stock program, which Aldrich had assumed was being managed by the Agricultural Council, had never been formally assigned to anyone. It had simply been managed, consistently, without authorization, for 14 months. "By whom?" Aldrich said. Thomas placed a single page on the table. A list of correspondence. 16 entries. The same handwriting. He went to the council records after Tomas left, and he pulled the logs for the previous year. The tax resolution. The trade route proposal. The border territory recommendations. The small, consistent reports, unreferenced, unattributed, delivered in the voice of the institution rather than the person, arriving in the administrative files every fortnight without exception. Luna Nordenmarch Tortoy. He said her name aloud in the empty chamber and heard how strange it sounded, not as a title, as a name. He was not certain he had ever said it as a name. Gregor found him there at midnight. He set a candle down and looked at the table, covered in reports. He said nothing. "I didn't know," Aldrich said. "Flat. Dottial. Factual. Without defense." "No," Gregor said. They sat together, in the silence of that which was considerable. He went to her room on the 10th night of not sleeping. He stood in the doorway briefly, then crossed the threshold, and lit the candle on the desk. The room was as she had left it, neat, stripped of her personal effects, the curtains drawn with the precision of someone who makes beds as a form of thought rather than obligation. The air was cold and faintly scented with cedar from her trunk, and something beneath it that he couldn't name but recognize. He found the notebook on the desk. He sat down in her chair. He opened it. The first pages were administrative, dates, project names, footnotes in the tight efficient script he had seen on the council reports, and not connected, because he had not been looking for the connection. He read through 2 months of planning. He turned the pages and kept reading because there was nothing else to do, and because stopping felt like something he was not ready for. Then he found the marginalia. Written in darker ink, the pen pressed slightly heavier, the marks of writing in the small hours when the mind works differently than in daylight. Notes scattered between the agenda items like punctuation in a language he had not known she was speaking. He skipped the morning meal again, asked Tomas to keep a portion warm. He takes his tea without anything in it. He should use honey. His voice is rough on cold mornings. He laughed tonight in the East Corridor reading Gregor's dispatch about the border count's hunting accident. "I was at the junction. I didn't go in." He stopped. He read the last line again. "I was at the junction. I didn't go in." He looked at the dark window. He thought about the library, sitting across from her asleep, without waking her. He recognized the restraint from the outside, and now he recognized it from the inside, from the cost of it, which the notebook had named without intending to. The recognition sat in him like a stone dropped in still water, not loud, only felt later in the widening rings. She was there, he thought. She was there every time. And I walked past the junction. Gregor found him in the morning, still in her chair, the notebook open in his hands. 5 months after the gate had closed behind her. The report came in a standard dispatch bundle from the Varenhal District Commissioner, a small document among large ones. Aldrich read it, standing at the window, where the afternoon light was best. Mining output, Varenhal sector. 41% increase. Labor disputes, 3 filed, 2 resolved at local level. Primary school construction, ground broken, projected completion by winter. He read the administrator's note at the bottom, which listed the project coordinator by name. Primary organizer, S. Valdcourt. He stood with the report in his hands for a long time. The afternoon light moved. He read her name again. The one that was hers rather than the title he had given her. And thought about Varenhal, the poorest district in the kingdom, the one with the oldest problems and the least political value, the one no one went to unless they were sent. She had gone there herself. Gregor, he said. Gregor appeared almost immediately, which suggested he had been nearby. He usually was lately. Aldrich handed him the report. Gregor read it. His expression shifted into the configuration it took when he was resisting the urge to say, "I told you so." "Prepare 2 horses, Aldrich said. "Just the 2 of us." "Just the 2 of us." The road to Varenhal was stone and then gravel, and then packed earth that the spring rains had turned to something between mud and intention. 2 days. Gregor rode in silence. A gift. He had spoken his piece in the first hour and had the discipline, rare in advisers, to leave it there. The village appeared on the far side of a ridge. Low gray buildings, smoke from a dozen chimneys. The iron smell of the foundry carried on a wind with no interest in courtesy. The surrounding hills were granite, the earth thin and rocky, the whole landscape constituted against ease. Aldrich heard her voice before he saw her. Clear and direct, with the cadence of someone accustomed to being the most prepared person in the room. Not arrogant, just factual. The second vent shaft runs too shallow. If you angle it northeast and drop 2 feet before the turn, you'll clear the rock shell. He came around the corner of the main building and stopped. She stood with her back half turned, her coat the dark, practical gray of someone who had stopped thinking about appearance and started thinking entirely about what she was doing. Her hair was up simply, without ceremony. There was chalk dust along her left forearm, where she had been working at a diagram on the timber frame beside her. She was not performing anything. She was just working. She was better at it than anyone around her and clearly had no need for them to know it. This, he thought, is who she was when I was not watching. He understood with a clarity that required no elaboration how much he had missed. Elspeth had spotted them from across the yard. She had the eyes of someone constitutionally suspicious of approaching strangers. He watched her lean toward Seraphine and say something quietly. Seraphine did not turn immediately. She finished her sentence to the mining engineer, her finger moving across the diagram, completing the thought. Only then did she turn. Their eyes met. He had not planned what to do at this point. He had planned the ride and the logistics and the fact of arriving. He had not planned the moment after that. She looked at him the way she had looked at him across the courtyard the morning she left, clearly, directly, giving nothing away. She had spent a year learning to do that. "Aldrich," she said. "Not, my lord." Not your grace. Just his name, which was its own kind of statement. Seraphine, he said. Behind him, Gregor discovered something intensely interesting about a cartwheel and moved toward it. The inn at Varenhal had 4 rooms and a landlady who appeared to believe in feeding people until they could not stand. Gregor disappeared to the smaller table by the window, with a plate the size of a shield. Aldrich and Seraphine sat at the corner table, with the candle between them. An hour left in it, maybe. The room around them was quiet. You didn't tell me you were leaving, he said. She wrapped both hands around her cup. Would you have listened? Not would you have tried to stop me. Not would you have asked me to stay. The exact right question. He sat with it, and the sitting was itself an answer. I don't know, he said. She looked up. She had not expected honesty. He could see that, the small shift in her expression, the slight recalibration. That's the first true thing you've said to me, she said. Not unkind. Factual. It's harder than it should be. I know. She lifted the cup, set it down without drinking. The candle moved. You want to know why I left? I want to know many things. He kept his voice level. But I'll start with that. She was quiet. The fire in the hearth threw warmth across her cheek, across her hands. He watched her decide something. The worst part, she said carefully, choosing each word like someone who has learned that words are not recoverable once given, was not that you didn't see me. A breath. The worst part was that sometimes you did. I could feel it, the moment your attention arrived, and then you would look away. He did not speak. As if she said, seeing me required something you had decided you couldn't give. The words were not accusations. That was what made them heavier. They were observations, precise, clean, the record of a year's worth of careful watching. He could not dispute the essential truth of them. Yes, he said. She looked at him. You're right, he said. I saw you, and I didn't know what to do with it. That's not an explanation. I know it isn't. No, she said. It isn't. I'm sorry. He said it cleanly. Not the formal apology of courts and correspondence, but the kind that knows it's insufficient and says itself anyway. But I didn't come here only to say that. She was very still across the table. I read your notebook, he said. Her expression changed. Barely, a slight movement at the corner of her mouth, something between surprise and bracing. You weren't meant to. You left it on the desk. That doesn't mean it was for you. I know. He leaned forward. Not much. He had learned from watching her, without understanding it was watching, that she required space. You asked Thomas to keep my breakfast warm. You wrote that you stood at the junction and heard me laughing and didn't come in. She looked at the table. I need to know why, he said. Why you didn't come in. The silence stretched. The candle burned lower. He waited. Because, she said slowly, if I had walked in, she stopped, started again. If I had allowed myself to. Another pause. He did not fill it. She lifted her eyes. I would have begun to hope, she said. And I had learned in that house how expensive hope is. He said nothing. He looked at her and let himself look, which was the thing he had been choosing not to do for a year. And the effect of it was considerable. She was not beautiful in the arranged, curated way of court women who had studied it. She was beautiful in the way of someone who did not think about it, whose face held its expression with the clarity of someone who had made peace with being seen, if not with being unseen. The firelight did something to the line of her throat. He reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. Lightly. Just that, his palm warm against the back of her hand, not grasping, not claiming, only contact, the first deliberate contact he had offered in a year. He felt the slight stiffness of her hand beneath his, and then the decision she made not to withdraw. "Give me time," he said. "Not come back. Not I need you. Just, give me time," and the acknowledgement implicit in it, that he knew he needed it, that he understood it had not yet been given, rather than simply not yet arrived. She looked at their hands. His was larger, scarred along the right index finger, a detail she had noticed, she suspected, a long time ago. She did not move her hand away. He woke to the sound of the foundry and the unfamiliar ceiling of the inn, and lay for a moment listening to the village come awake around him. She arrived at the yard at 7:30, chalk on her right sleeve already, a fresh mark. She moved through the space with the comfortable authority of someone who knew exactly where she was and what she needed to do there. The mining foreman fell into step beside her. She pointed at something above the main shaft opening. He nodded. Aldrich watched. He had seen her in council, at the table's far end where the light was worst. He had seen her at formal dinners. He had seen her in the archive with a sword between them. The clearest picture he had of her from the beginning, the one he had returned to most often. He had understood it then as defiance. He understood it now as something more precise. He came down to the yard. She was in the middle of something, and did not acknowledge him immediately. He stood at the edge of the discussion with his hands in his coat pockets and waited, which was not something he normally did but which felt here correct. The foreman left. She turned. "You're observing," she said. "I'm learning," he said. "There's a distinction." The corner of her mouth moved. "Most people don't know the difference." He was quiet. Then, "Show me." Something in her face weighed the request carefully. Then, the main shaft first. Then the water table. He followed her. All day he said almost nothing, and she did not seem to require him to. She worked with the efficiency of someone who had found the exact thing she was meant to do, and was doing it. And he watched that, and could not look away, because it was the thing the notebook had suggested, and the thing he had not been present to see. By evening he was tired in the way that new information tires you. Not the body, but the mind adjusting its shape around something it had not had room for before. She did not ask whether he had learned anything. He thought, everything. The geological maps were spread across the table in the mine supervisor's office, a low-ceilinged room smelling of iron ore and damp stone. Seraphin had been using them for weeks. The corners worn, the fold lines soft, annotations in pencil along the edges. She was explaining the stratification patterns with the matter-of-factness of someone who had not quite decided whether she was teaching him or thinking aloud. He preferred the second. Teaching required an audience, and he did not want to be her audience. He wanted to be in the room as something other than an observer. Here. Her finger came down on a region in the lower right quadrant. The layer shifts. Most of the team hasn't noticed because they're following the seam north, but it turns east-northeast at about 40 feet, and they're going to lose it if they stay on the current heading. He leaned forward. The table was not large. Her shoulder was close enough that he could feel the warmth of it, not touching, but present. The specific awareness of proximity that requires attention not to collapse. "How did you identify it?" he said. "The sound changes." She tapped her annotation beside the region. "I went down twice. The resonance is different in the northeast section. The rock is denser." "You went into the shaft." She looked at him sideways. "How else would I know what it sounded like?" He looked at the map rather than at her. She was right, unambiguously, demonstrably right, which he had come to understand was her default state regarding the things she had decided to understand. He thought about the council chamber. about the way she had stopped mid-sentence, and no one had asked her to continue. He did not say anything about it, because there was nothing adequate to say, and she had heard enough inadequate things from him already. "All right," he said instead. "Northeast, 30 feet. She looked at him. He nodded toward the margin. "Your notation," he said. "I was confirming I understood it." Her expression did something small that he was only beginning to learn to read. Something close to warmth. If warmth had been carefully folded and placed somewhere, it would not be noticed. "Northeast," she agreed. 30 feet. Magistra Hild organized the meal, as she apparently organized most things in Varenhal, with the decisive energy of a woman who had run a medical practice in a mining district for 20 years, and had therefore seen everything, and been afraid of almost nothing. She set the long table in the square between the inn and the assembly hall, under a sky that had gone, for the first time in a week, genuinely clear. The village came, not in formal order, not in silence. They came as people came to a meal, noisily, with children in front, arguments set aside at the table's edge, the specific warmth of a community that had been cold and was briefly not. Aldrich sat at the end of the bench nearest the fire. Seraphine sat beside him, not arranged there, simply there. Elspeth took her other side and immediately began talking to the ironsmith's wife about roof material, leaving the two of them in a pocket of relative quiet. He had not sat at a table like this since he thought about it and could not find the memory. The castle had formal meals and informal meals and private meals, all of which were still performances. This was not a performance. The ironsmith told a story about the time the main shaft flooded. A miner contributed a story about the previous supervisor, who had hired a man claiming to speak to underground rivers. The whole table laughed. Seraphine laughed too. Genuinely, her head tilting back slightly, her hand coming up to cover her mouth in the way people do when surprised by their own reaction. He had not heard her laugh before. He had heard the breath of it, the suppressed edge. He had not heard the full sound. He picked up his cup and looked at the table, rather than at her. "Aldrich," she said quietly, beside him. He looked. She was watching him with her usual assessment, but there was something warmer in it tonight. "You're not comfortable," she said. Not accusatory. Observational. "I'm not used to this," he said. "I know," she said, and then, "You're doing it anyway." He looked at her for a moment. The firelight was in her eyes. She held his gaze with the directness that had been the first thing he had noticed about her, with the sword between them, which felt very long ago and very close at once. "Yes," he said. "I am." She looked away first, slowly, deliberately, as though choosing to rather than being driven to. She reached for her cup and her sleeve brushed his arm, and neither of them moved away. The evening continued around them, warm and unremarkable, and he sat in the middle of it and thought, she was right. I chose not to see her. And then more quietly, I am not going to choose that again. Evening of the third day. The sun had gone behind the ridge, and the sky was the blue of early dark, carrying the iron smell of the foundry, and below it something colder and cleaner from the mountain. She stood at the outer boundary of the village, at the place where the stone path met the mountain road, looking north. He walked to stand beside her. He did not ask what she was looking at. He had learned that, in 3 days, more than he had learned in a year of the same house. "If I come back," she said. He waited. "It won't be, because you are the king." She said it without looking at him. "It won't be because I signed a document." "I know," he said. "I need you to know that before I tell you what the reason would be." "All right." She was quiet a moment. The mountain road ran away from them into the dimming distance, in the direction of Nordenmarch and the castle, and the gate she had walked through 5 months ago. On the wedding night, she said, you sat down in the chair and you went to sleep. I thought it was cold, an arrangement, a man doing the minimum required by decency. It was, he said. I was. But you looked. She stopped, turned slightly, though not fully toward him. You looked, when you were asleep, like someone who was trying very hard to do the right thing and was tired from it. And I covered you with the blanket because I was afraid that was the only version of you I was going to get. She paused, and I thought, even this version is worth something. Which surprised me. He looked at the mountain road. And you came here, she said. That also surprised me. He turned toward her. She was still looking north, her profile clean against the dimming sky, and he thought about all the things he was constituted against saying, not against feeling, but against saying, which was its own architecture to dismantle, beam by beam. He was not going to manage it in a single evening. I came, he said, because I read your notebook and understood that you had been there the whole time, and that I had been the one missing, not you, me. She looked at him. He held her gaze and did not look away. The silence between them was different from all the previous silences. Those had been the silence of two people in the same space with nothing connecting them. This was the silence of two people who have arrived at the same location from different roads and are taking a moment to recognize each other. She did not say, come back. He did not say, please. Tomorrow, she said. We can discuss it tomorrow. He nodded. That was enough. They left before dawn, all four of them. Gregor and Elspeth tactfully bookending the group in a way that gave its own kind of privacy. The mountain road in early morning was gray and silent, the horse's breath making clouds in the cold air. Tell me about Crow, Seraphine said, after they had ridden in silence for an hour. He looked at the road ahead. What do you want to know? What you know, and what you've been waiting for. He considered how to answer. His family was involved in several land transactions roughly 20 years ago, he said. Legal by the letter of the contract, not by the spirit. Involving families in financial vulnerability. A pause. Including yours. She was quiet. I've known the shape of it for some time, he said. But I didn't have sufficient formal documentation to act without Crow contesting every element in court for years. He's resourceful enough to make the process itself the punishment. The file, she said. In the archive. That night. He looked at her. The file I came for, she said. That's the missing piece. He held her gaze a moment. The file is one piece. Over the years, the council has accumulated records of 3 other related transactions, enough together to constitute a pattern that no court could explain away. The archive file closes the last gap. Then we have it, she said. We. He felt the word settle, not claimed, not presumed, just said, as a fact she had assessed and found accurate. We have it, he agreed. They rode through the morning in the quiet of people who have found they can be silent without having anything unresolved between them. A different and more valuable silence than the ones they had shared before. Gregor had prepared with the efficiency of a man who had been waiting for this for some time. By the time they arrived in Nordenmarch, the documentation was assembled, authenticated, and filed with the Crown's record office. 3 other transactions corroborating the pattern. The archive file completing it. The council was summoned for the following morning. Crow sat at the council table and looked at the documents with the expression of a chess player who has seen, 2 moves out, that the game is finished. He had played a long game and played it well. His only miscalculation had been underestimating how much could change once the right person decided to look. Seraphine did not attend the council session. She had not needed to. After, Aldrich went to find her. She was in the library, sitting at the large table in the center, the window behind her, a cup of tea and a stack of reports, working with the settled focus of someone who has returned to a place and found it still her own. The afternoon light came through the glass and turned the surface of the table warm. She looked up when he came in. "Well," she said. "It's done," he said. She held his gaze a moment, then nodded, small, definite, and looked back at the document in her hand. He understood she did not need more than that. She had not done it for the spectacle and did not need one at the end. He sat down across the table from her. The quality of her concentration shifted slightly, the way a room's temperature changes when someone opens a door, perceptible without being dramatic. He picked up a report from the stack on his side. "Tell me about this one," he said. She looked at him, at the report, at the window, back at him. "That's the Varenhal School project," she said. "I know," he said. "Tell me about it." She held his gaze a moment longer. Then she set down what she was holding and turned toward him and began to explain it from the beginning. And he listened, this time, not for the conclusions but for the voice behind them. The small dining room, 3 tables, a fire lit, 2 places set without ceremony by staff, who had learned not to ask for instructions before offering them. He pulled her chair out before he sat down. She stopped behind it for a full second. He noticed, and she noticed that he noticed, and neither said anything about it. She sat. He sat across from her. The meal was simple: bread, roasted root vegetables, the strong-flavored Northern Valley cheese. He had asked the kitchen to source it specifically. He had not told her this. She took a piece and her expression changed, barely, but he was paying attention in a new way. "Where did they find this?" she said. "I asked them to." She looked at him. "You wrote about it," he said, "in the trade report, 14 months ago." She was quiet a moment. The fire moved in a small draft. "You read it," she said. "I read every report you sent," he said. "From the beginning. I just didn't connect them." He looked at her. "To you, which tells you something about how I was paying attention." She looked at her cup, picked it up, held it, set it down. "I've been wondering," she said quietly, "whether it matters, whether starting from here is still—" She stopped, halting in a way unusual for her, in territory she had not mapped. "Whether it's possible to—" "Start from here," he said. "Yes." She looked at him. "Not from the beginning," he said. "I'm not asking you to pretend a year didn't happen. I'm asking to start from what we know now." She was quiet. The fire settled. Outside, wind against the upper windows. Then she said something about the school in Varenhal, the roof material, whether the northern stone would hold against a winter like the last one. He answered. She answered back. The conversation moved, finding its own route. 2 people discovering what it sounds like when they simply talk without the architecture of what they haven't said between them. He said something that was meant as observation, and came out slightly as a joke, about the cheese, and her trade report, and the fact that it had taken him 14 months to source a local product he ate now in 10 minutes. She laughed. Not the suppressed version. The full sound, brief and genuine, and it surprised her slightly. He could see that, and then she looked at the table, and he looked at the table, and neither said anything about it. He thought, I want to hear that again, and then, more quietly, I want to deserve to hear it again. The school needs a librarian, she said. I've been thinking about the qualification requirements. Tell me, he said. And she did. They did not say I love you that night or the next. It was not the kind of story where those words arrived before everything else was built to hold them. What they built instead was smaller and more durable. The habit of being honest about small things, which is the foundation of being honest about large ones. The practice of saying I don't know before inventing a certainty. The discipline of staying in the room when leaving would be easier. Which is the only way any room ever becomes home. Seraphine learned to let herself be seen by someone who was learning to look. It was harder than she had expected. Some mornings she still woke with the old instinct, become smaller, occupy less space, and had to remind herself with the same methodical patience she brought to everything, that the instinct had been necessary once and was not necessary here. Aldrich learned that present and occupied are not the same word, that a person can fill a room without being in it, that the work of being known requires a different discipline than the work of being obeyed, and that the first is considerably harder and considerably more worth doing. On the nights he could not sleep, he no longer went to the library alone. He went, and sometimes she was there, and sometimes she was not, and both were different now from what they had been before. There was one more thing. Late in the autumn of that year, she was standing at the high window of the east corridor when he came to find her. The last of the season's light was going, turning the courtyard the color of amber. He stood beside her and looked at it too, and after a while he turned to her, and the light caught his eyes the way lightning had caught them in the archive all those months ago. That flash of gold beneath the gray, unmistakable this time, warm and steady, the way a fire is warm when you are standing inside, rather than watching from a distance. She had spent a year not understanding what it was. She thought she understood it now. She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back and did not look away. She took his hand, not because anyone had required it, not because it was useful or strategic, or because it completed any calculation she had made, simply because it was there, and because she had decided, with the same methodical patience she brought to everything, that some decisions did not need to be useful to be correct. He closed his hand around hers. Gregor, who passed the corridor some time later, noted the courtyard window with two silhouettes against the amber light and did not stop to comment, because he had been patient for 30 years and intended to continue. Outside, Norden March, gray-skied, cold-aired, constituted against ease, carried its people forward through seasons that did not pause for sentiment, the way all durable kingdoms do. The throne had forgotten no one. It had simply waited for everyone to look up. Some people spend years in the same house, eating at the same table, breathing the same air, and never truly see each other. Seraphine didn't leave because she stopped caring. She left because she had been there the whole time, and he had kept walking past the junction. That's the quiet cruelty of being overlooked by someone who could see you, not someone cruel, not someone cold, but someone who simply hadn't learned yet that presence is a choice you make every single day. And Aldrich? He wasn't a villain. He was just a man who confused occupying a space with being in it, until the day she was gone and the silence finally had a shape. The most devastating distance isn't miles. It's two people standing in the same room, one of them invisible, one of them not yet looking. The throne didn't forget her name. He did. And the hardest part, she almost forgot her own. If this story hit something in you, drop a comment and tell me. Were you rooting for him to run down those stairs, or did she deserve to walk? I genuinely want to know where you stand. If you want more stories like this one, the slow burns, the unsaid things, the people who find their way back, hit like and subscribe. It means more than you know. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. That matters.